Good afternoon, everyone who's joined us. We'll start exactly at 5 o'clock. We've got just 1 minute to go.
Good afternoon, Pam. Good afternoon.
Okay, it is 5 o'clock. We're gonna start. Let me start by introducing myself. My name is Pam Yako, and I am the program director today. Usapho lakwa Gxilishe, Nkosikazi kaMthembu, uThami, noZoxolo, noMonwabisi okanye uKwekwe as we know him. Usapho lakwaMdodana kwakunye nosapho lakwaJolobe. Siyanibulisa ngale mini. Kwaye sisithi dudwini. Le service, it's been convened as a service for on behalf of friends and comrades of Comrade Gxilishe. And we just want to say, as these people congregated here, that we want to send our heartfelt condolences to the family on the untimely passing of Bongani. So we are here to share in your pain and recognize your loss. We might not know how deep the wound is, but all we want to say this afternoon is that Sinani. And the only way that we could do so and show that we are with you in this difficult time it was to organize this event or this memorial service. For me as a person, memorial services are in themselves full of contradictions, because on the one hand you have to mourn or grieve the departure of someone, but at the same time it is a moment to celebrate one's life, a life that is well lived, a life of selfless giving in the case of Bongani, a life of being a true patriot and a humble servant of our people. It is very difficult for all of us today to say in one sentence, Bongani and departed, because it's not meant to be like that. And given that, but it is where it is, and it is God's work and God's will. And we do not have control over that. But what we want to do in the next 2 hours, beginning now, is just to celebrate in the only way that we know how, who Bongani was, or Themba was, or Unabutu was to us. In a way that is befitting of the day and the moment that it faces us, but at the same time, in a way that is also fun, because those of us that do know Themba know he would always be laughing. He would always be sharing jokes wherever Themba was. In a gathering, if you just move closer to him, there would be laughter and there would be whispering, because as we know, he did have, I don't know how many people know this, and I think he was in denial himself, that he did need assistance in terms of hearing. So he had a little bit of hearing, dare I say, disability. So he spoke loudly. So whenever you're sitting next to me, you would say, "Utini." So you have to all the time try and translate what was being said, because he would lose things as the proceedings happen. But at the same time, would be the first one to joke. So my job today is to be a moderator. We don't have much time. We've got a very good lineup of speakers that have been given specific roles to share about Bongani's life. And so I will talk about that in a moment. But to get us grounded, I'm going to ask Bishop Sidwell Mohutu to just start the proceedings with a prayer. Over to you, Bishop.
Thank you very much, Comrade Pam, and greetings to everybody participating in this wonderful service to remember and celebrate the life of Mthembu, a beloved comrade, a friend that I have personally known for over 30 years. We come together from the trenches, from the days of Azaso, Sansko. We didn't make it into Sasko. We ended with Sansko and Satisco and all the cultural elements of the liberation movement. The last time I spoke to him was on the 29th of June, when he was trying to organize me to address his middle management at the department. And we had planned that we would do that because he wanted me to address them on matters of spirituality as a former public servant myself. I'm therefore humbled to participate today. I read this evening from John chapter 11, verses 17 to 27, John 11, 17 to 27. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away. And many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." Come, let us pray. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on us. Fall afresh on us in the valley of the shadow of death, in the valley of deep darkness, in the valley of grief, as we come together as those who love and continue to love Bongani, those who have been his friends, his comrades and colleagues, those who have been pilgrims and fellow travelers with him. We come together to celebrate and to share in good memories of his life. We've come here to pray for Tami, for Nokolo, and for Munabisi, for the Jolobe and the Gxilishe family. We ask that you bless and you strengthen us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I just have a wonderful picture, and I was meditating on the Methodist Xhosa hymn 259. Ndinika amehlo ndikhangele phezulu ezulwini ndibone khona abangcwele bevuya enkosini. A mental, spiritual picture and imagination of Themba arriving over in the world yonder and meeting with comrades who have preceded him, who have preceded us, people like Chule, KK Papiana, Omvuso Mbebe, Okaya Mabete, Ozwai Tanzi, and many others who have preceded him, and meeting others from different formation of the life that have shaped him, whether it is the older generation of Omre that he served with as the first provincial secretary of the Eastern Cape after 1994, against Themba, and looking at them, and reporting to them. As he liked teasing people, wonke was lentwana umali, mfundisi lentwana uncane, abamazi uThixo, abamazi usekudumisa. A fellow traveler, a believer, sengamadodana mna noMthembu in the Methodist Church. And so I have come to celebrate a brother, a fellow believer. And friends, I have titled my message, Our Comrade Will Rise and Live Again. Our comrade will rise and live again. And I anchor my message on John 11, verses 25 to 26. Jesus saying, I'm the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. What is life? This is one of the questions that the whole of humanity has struggled with for ages and continue to do so even today. Philosophers have been wrestling with this question in its different ways. They continue to investigate what is life and what is non-life. What are living and non-living things? Biologists have linked life to birth, to growth and mortality. They measure life and limit it to our birth and our death certificates. The challenge is that even botanists and zoologists are about life. Therefore, the question deepens. Is life the same? Is the life of animals and plants of the same value as that of human beings? Ethicists continue to grapple with when does life start and end. There are questions about abortion relating to when does the life of a fetus start. There have been debates about test tube babies and so on. There have been questions about euthanasia, asking about the essence and the quality of life. There have been struggles about those who are in comas, those who are said to be brain dead and on life support machines. Medical doctors are preoccupied with protecting and securing life, helping people to live longer. They are addressing and measuring life in terms that are more than just inhaling oxygen, but asking fundamental questions about its quality. Theologians, on the other hand, have considered all this and grappled with the essence and the value of life. The World Council of Churches commissioned a project on the theology of life. I remember that the late Professor Russell Boltman was involved in this project. In their work, they went beyond just measuring the length and quality of life, but focused on the meaning of life. They sought to establish the spirituality of life that transcends the seen and the unseen. The Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologians released a statement with the title, A Cry for Life, the Spirituality of Their World. Their statement focused on life in relation to the marginalized in society. Is the life of the poor of the same value as that of the rich? William Shakespeare wrote of it in Macbeth, Act 5, Scene 5. Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. Life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. You see, friends, Shakespeare understands life as an imaginable impermanence. He sees it just as a walking shadow. He saw it as poorly directed or remote control player that does not last long on a stage. It is an insignificant tale told by an idiot, he said. In the gospel that we read this afternoon, Martha and Mary had to face in a particular way the matter of life as it relates to the death when they sent an SOS invitation to their home about their brother Lazarus who had died. The biologists and pathologists of the time would have issued a death certificate declaring Lazarus dead. The certificate would have registered the date of birth and the date of death. It would have declared the cause of death. Thus, our context of our scripture lesson is that of a post-funeral in the story we read. Jesus is visiting the home of his friends, Mary and Martha, who were like family to him. Jesus had loved the deceased brother Lazarus. Jesus, who had missed the initial call to visit Lazarus when he was sick, he has now come post when he had already died. Martha, in protest, said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Jesus responds with words that make no sense to those who have lost a loved one like we have lost Bongani. And Jesus responds with words that form the theme of my message and says to Martha and Mary, your brother will rise again. That is our gospel message to our sister, our friend and colleague Tammy, to Nokolo and to Munwabisi, the entire Jolobe and Gxilishe family. Your husband and father will rise and will live again. It is a message to us, the friends, the colleagues and comrades gathered here today. Our beloved Bongs, Themba, will rise and will live again. He will not rise in the physical form that today's world is obsessed with. You will remember the story and scandal of a so-called prophet and apostle who had claimed to have raised somebody from the dead. That is not the kind of rising that we talk about. Bongani Gxilishe will rise through a powerful life of testimony that surpasses the life that is determined through heart pulses and intake of oxygen. Bongani will surpass the material things that today society is obsessed with. These are material things that have caused our leaders to fall from glory because of the greed and the looting that has taken place in our country for years, and we have come to see repeated in the past week. Themba will rise because Jesus Christ, the great I am that he served, is here, just like he showed up to Martha and Mary. Jesus arrives boldly, introduces himself to Mary and Martha and says, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Jesus Christ introduced himself then as he does today as the great I am. The great I am, friends, is here. Jesus' identity is drawn from the God parent who assisted Moses with credentials to Israelites who had asked him. Moses had asked, "What will I say when they ask of me?" Yahweh wanted them to know that Moses was sent and served the I am who I am. Today, Jesus offers that salvation and restoration of faith and life, just like he did to Mary and Martha, and does it to us today. Jesus represents himself in the context of death, in the context of the funeral of their brother, their comrade, as he does to ours today, that he is the resurrection. Jesus, friends, is the resurrection. He is the contrast and antithesis of death. Christ is the resurrection power by which he shall rise from our death. England preacher Spurgeon said Jesus was basically saying, if Jesus comes to Lazarus, Lazarus must live. And so if Jesus comes to us, if Jesus comes to the bonds who he served in the church and in society, he too, like us, must come alive and live. It is my deep belief that Themba will be raised again in our hearts and in our minds. Bongani will rise when we serve our people in whatever vocations we find ourselves in, as we seek to emulate him, whether as activists, whether as public servants, whether as community leaders. When educators teach with devotion, Bongani will rise and live again. When nurses and doctors care with their patients with compassion, Bongani will rise and live again. When farmers produce with commitment, when politicians govern with honesty, when leaders lead with integrity, when those of us who claim him and his values go and emulate him in our own sectors and in our own spheres, he will live and rise again. He will not die. It is he who is the resurrected one, from whom we can claim our resurrection and sing with the isiXhosa singer. Uvukile wena nhloko yabo bakholwayo sakuvuka nathi ngoko thina sikholwayo. We will rise because Christ, the Redeemer, has risen, and those of us who live by association with him will rise again. It is furthermore my deep prayer that God will raise those of us left behind. I pray that God will raise to life our political and public representatives, that God will bring to life all leaders of our society, our community leaders and public servants. God will raise us from our ignorance, from our unconsciousness to the new life that God presents to us. God will raise us from greed, from death of conscience to new life. God will raise and restore those who are left behind, those who are causing the mayhem that is destroying and looting, not just the material things that we are seeing, but those who are looting our future, those who are looting the unseen, intangible things such as values of peace, the prosperity of the nation that Bongani struggled and fought for. As I conclude, the Gospel of John is a resource about understanding the spirituality and essence of life. For John, life is not about things that we see and touch. Life is more than that. Jesus Christ is life. No Jesus, no life. Jesus presents himself not just as the author and finisher of life, but as life itself. Jesus offers life that cannot be restricted by the grave. Bongani will not be restricted by the grave. Bongani will not be reduced from his birth certificate to his death certificate. Jesus Christ provides and gives us a guarantee that those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. Bongani will rise again. Bongani will live again. His soul is what we embrace. His values is what we internalize. And as we move forward and live those values out, young generations and generations to come will know that once upon a time there was Themba, and he continues to live, captured not by visible monuments, but by that which we come to embrace and to live out. I offer this in the name of the Father, in the name of the Son, in the name of the Holy Spirit. May the spirit of Bongs continue to live. Bongani, our comrade, will rise and will live again. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Bishop. Let me also declare upfront that I am a parishioner of the Limpopo North Methodist Church, and this is my bishop. But I had nothing to do with Bishop Sidwell being the one who's sharing a sermon with us today. But nonetheless, thank you very much for grounding us, because sometimes in these moments, we often don't know where to look and sometimes we are overwhelmed by the moment, because it is a deep wound, and it helps to just bring us back and ground us as friends of Themba. And I'm sure with time, we will also heal. My job today is really to be the program director. What that is it's a glorified term for a timekeeper. And we have agreed on certain times with the panelists, and you would know the panelists as there was a program for today circulated. So I will keep my camera off, and I will switch it on just as a cue to the panelists that it is time. Okay. So when you've come closer to the time that we've agreed on, you would see me switching on my screen again, and that means it's time to conclude. Of course, I had to give some allowance to Bishop because of Bishop for obvious reasons. But my other speakers, there will be no such allowance. So it's the time we agreed on, and please let's stick to that. Also, other people that are in attendance already, I see there are some messages in the chat box. If you feel called to just leave a message in the chat box, please do so, so that we just note those messages as we move along. Okay. And some of them are a bit long, so I'm not going to be able to read all of them, but I think the one that I have now, there's one from Pempem Nombakuse, who says, "Rest well, Bongani." And then M. Kobosheane also has got a message to Themba, and the rest are others. there's others there, and I think people can read them from the chat box. So I'll get to the first speaker of the day, and the one thing that we agreed on as the people that are speaking today is that we want to remember Themba as he would have been, as if when he was with us. So we want to enjoy this moment as much as we can. So it's a light evening, and let's keep that. But it's not his 55th birthday, or at the same time. But at the same time, it is a moment to honor a life that was well lived, and so we need to just keep that balance. So I will start with Dr. Lindiwe Msenganandlela, who is our first speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. To the Gxilishe and Jolobe families, Sistami, Abantwana, friends, and comrades, we have come to say to you, Tutuzelekani, Akuhlanga, Lungehlile. My name is Lindiwe Msenganandlela. I first met Bongani, whom we called Nabudu, in the 1980s. In remembering the lighter moments of his comradeship, I would like to share 3 incidents very briefly that I hope will resonate with most of his friends. The first 2 are in the context of the struggle for liberation in our country and the accountability dilemmas that once confronted Ubongs. And Yena, his laugh was seldom quiet. He opened his mouth and he laughed with a sound. The third incident is deeply personal. So let me start with the first. And the context and scene here is the mass mobilization pillar of the liberation struggle. And this was during the time when we were members of the Azanian Student Association, AZASO, which later became the South African National Student Congress, SANSCO, an affiliate of the United Democratic Front, and now known as SASCO. As Mfundisi said, we never reached SASCO. So these were among the other organizations in our country which formed part of this mass mobilization pillar. Those of us who were at Rhodes University in Grahamstown met Bongani with other friends who are in this webinar when they were students at Vista University in Port Elizabeth. At the time, Rhodes had very few Black African students. Later, Bongs and other comrades from Port Elizabeth came to study to Rhodes. There were other formidable groups of comrades who came to Rhodes at the time, some from Fort Hare, others from Gauteng, others from the North and Natal. I will not name them and will not name them now to save time. All the comrades who descended at Rhodes in the mid-1980s came with such revolutionary zeal. They definitely made their presence felt in many ways, both on campus and outside campus. I will not go further than that. Our local AZASO affiliated Rhodes was the Black Student Movement, the BSM, similar to organizations such as the BSS at Wits and other companies and other campuses. I came to work with Bongani at the time when we were in the regional executive of AZASO and later SANSCO for the Eastern Cape, and when I was the deputy chairperson of the BSM. And yes, let me pause to say, may the souls of the departed rest in eternal peace. I'm thinking of comrades such as Chule, KK Papiane, Kaya, whom we called Giap Mabete, Zwandile Tansi, Zwandile Poswa, and many others. As the regional executive, we would visit and undertake organizational work with other universities and teacher colleges in Port Elizabeth, as well as those in the former Ciskei and the Transkei. The newly formed sport organization, SATISCO, was a sister organization also used to advance the objectives of our liberation struggle. Let me again pause and say, may the souls of Mvuzo, we used to call him Mbebe and Sindisile, Unyan, McLean, rest in peace. We would travel and provide contributions as we engage with other colleagues and comrades nationally, whether we were at Natal University or Durban Westville, at UCT or UWC, or just on the ground, on the streets, early in the morning or in the evening. We were there. And here comes now the two examples that faced Bongani as a person who, in most cases, was assigned the portfolio of reporting. And he was always required to provide reports. And that's why we were not surprised when he ended up later being the secretary to the Eastern Cape region, the ANC Eastern Cape region. So in this first incident, it was about the Education Charter campaign. Our organization, as it transitioned to SANSCO, initiated a campaign known as the Education Charter campaign, drawing from the Freedom Charter. Bantwana bakabongani, ndicela ze nimamele kakuhle nive how your father contributed even to the constitution esinayo today. And in the Education Charter campaign, Azaso was seeking to solidify the ideological foundations of the Congress Alliance and undertook to do this work because now we were going to transition also to SANSCO and undertake this campaign in alliance with NUSAS, which was an organization of students in the former white universities. And it also worked with COSAs in high schools. So at the time, the role of students and their organizations was very clearly articulated by the ANC in exile, particularly President O.R. Tambo. To this end, students engaged in ground struggles and future-oriented visioning processes, working with ordinary people, working with worker organizations, working with civic organizations, faith-based organizations in both urban and rural areas. That's why you found most of those students in villages as well as in townships. This is the context within which we undertook work in the Education Charter campaign in the Eastern Cape region. And as you will know now, our constitution today outlines basic rights with regard to education, which can be traced to the work of comrades such as Bongani Gxilishe. I implore you to find time to revisit our constitution, more so at this time when it must be defended for a number of reasons. It is a constitution that is drawn from that Freedom Charter, the Harare Declaration thereafter of the ANC, the ready to govern documents of the ANC. They all influence our constitution today. And take time to look at the clauses that deal with education. They are in section 29, 1 and 2, and they have a lot to do with the work of Bongani. Coming back then to the latter moments of the Education Charter campaign, in terms of methodology, there was a questionnaire that was supposed to be filled in by our volunteers. All of us were supposed to go out and volunteer. So Bongani had the responsibility of compiling consolidated reports, whether it's on the campaign in general or the state of the organization. But on a lighter moment, there were data collection problems, in terms of methodology and the integrity of data. This was a serious matter, but please bear with me. There were lighter moments that we shared with NABOD at this time. One comrade from this institution, who I won't mention his name, was explaining the difficulty that they are finding. Now we are sitting in a committee meeting and different comrades are reporting from various institutions, and this comrade had glasses, so he touched on his glasses and report that there was a frustration that comrades on the ground get tired with the filling in of the questions. And then there are reports that they just sit underneath the tree and start filling the questionnaires with their own ideas, when actually the methodology is about asking ordinary people to envision what kind of education we want in a future South Africa. So of course we were surprised by this report, but we would laugh and Bongani would really, really laugh. And the second one was on the gender question. I will not go into detail with it, but just to say that we would discuss, the nature of the struggle, the national question, Russia, the class question, and the gender question. And Azaso and Sansko at the time had a challenge with women organization. The numbers involved in organizational work were lower than planned. Furthermore, from a leadership point of view, most women were not keen to take the women organizer portfolio, but were available to take other executive positions. So we ended up with this one gentleman, whose name I will again not mention. Is another gentleman who became a women organizer. So in discussing the draft report now, that needs to be taken up, whether maybe nationally, Bongs would be ultimately delivering this report. And when we were drafting them, there would be a joke about the difficulty about this problem. And the big challenge also that we used to laugh about was that some of the comrades who ended up taking up this responsibility used very challenging methods to do the organizational work. So as Bongani was delivering the report now in that particular platform, we would be laughing about this challenge of methodology. Of course, the state of women organization improved in this aspect when Comrade Fidi Potchite, now Kobule, became the SANSCO national organizer. Lastly, as friends, I think that it is so important to be a friend like Bongani, who is present, who is just there in his simple way, in good times and difficult times. I remember that Bongani was there for us at a very, very difficult time, quietly, even in our first New Year's Eve session after our son had passed on. Bongani was just sitting there with his wife and other comrades, just sitting there with us. The following day, we were in Port Alfred, and the following day, he had to pick up our daughter to the airport, and he was so considerate, asking her what time he should pick her up. These are small things, and we must be kind to one another, comrades. Friendship and comradeship is about small and big things. Bongani was politically astute. Bongani had integrity, and I must say, kuba twana bakhe, especially nabunkosikazi wakhe, we are here sonzakele, lalani ngenxeba. Enkosi.
Siyabulela kakhulu. As I already said, I do have a difficult job there's a lot of things to be shared about Themba. And we would like to hear all of the gems and all of the stories. And so it might feel harsh when I switch on the camera, but it is what it is, and my apologies about that. And just to acknowledge that there is a lot of messages on the chat box. And just to say that if you want just the panelists to see the message, you say message to panelists. And then if you want panelists and attendees to see your message, then select panelists and attendees. And I see most people have selected message just panelists. So it means other people in the meeting are not able to see your message. I'm not saying rewrite it, but I'm just alerting you that it's panelists and attendees if you want everyone to see it. But if you just want the panelists to see it, then you could select that option. And fortunately, Comrade Lindiwe, whilst you decided not to divulge the name of the person who was the woman organizer who is in this meeting, someone decided to divulge the name. And the fortunate part that he thought he was kind of revealing the name of Mr. X in this instance, but he only sent the message to panelists. So not everyone saw the message and or the name, but the panelists, as they sit here, they know Mr. X, who you did not name. Maybe Mr. X, if he happened to be a panelist, I don't know if he is, but if it happens to be a panelist, maybe he'll own up and say and identify himself. But it is a he, if I may say that. I'm gonna move to Baso Sanu as the next speaker. If you could just unmute yourself, and then take the platform. Am I not seeing him? I don't see him in there as the panelist. Fundile, is he in the meeting? I thought I saw his name earlier.
He was in the meeting. Let me look for him. Yeah.
All right. Whilst that is happening, I'm going to move on just in the interest of time, and move on to Dr. Mutter, who's our next speaker. She is in the meeting. I saw her. Okay.
Yes, I am in the meeting. Thank you, Comrade, my friend Pam, for taking the responsibility of leading us this evening. I want to greet all the colleagues, friends, and comrades gathered this afternoon. And I will be quite brief because I have found it difficult because we are still very shocked with Bongani's passing. So I decided that I will write down what I'm going to say so that I stay within the lane. Thank you very much, colleagues, for this opportunity. So I start. Where do I begin to exalt a man whose idea of a man, besides that of having born a man, was that of a fullest human being? Where do I begin to convey an idea of a civil servant whose notion of servant was in the doing and not in the noun? Where do I begin to affirm and to confirm an idea of an activist whose activism exceeded ownership and political appropriation? Where do I begin to tell you about a friend whose heart's contemplation and laughter could be seen through his eyes? Where do I start to evoke a colleague whose common sense and pragmatic judgment could redirect a difficult conversation towards a doable solution? Where do I start to assert a model public servant of the type our country so desperately needs as it lies bleeding at these difficult times? How do I typify the measure of a colleague who led us and who led me as I was training to lead? How do we commit to embody what Bongani Gxilishe has shown us should be the standard, what he has shown us to be the touchstone in service, in discernment, in kindness, in humility, and in contestation of what we should not and what we cannot be as public servants? These questions hang in the air, and these questions beckon us to deep reflection. It is indeed an honor to be asked to say a few words about Bongani at this unbelievably sad time. I humble I humbly pay tribute to our colleague as part of a collective of public servants of our generation that Bongani so believed in. He worked as part of a collective. Bongani meant so much to so many people. He crammed so much into his short life. He did so much in the service of this nation and of his province of birth that one cannot truly be short of words when paying tribute to him. For me, 3 attributes stand out in my mind, and I will just go over these 3. Those of us who worked in the provincial government at that time with Bongs count ourselves privileged to call him our friend and our colleague. He was unfailingly polite, a gentleman in all the positive senses of that word. As a leader, he was exceptional. His leadership style was inclusive, compassionate, and constructive. He lifted all those around him as he went. He epitomized the idea of servant leadership. He led with integrity and was a role model of ethical leadership. No one who came into contact with Bongani could fail to appreciate his pleasant disposition, ready smile, and infectious sense of humor. As colleagues, we always delighted in good-natured banter, as Lindiwe has indicated. And Bongani more than held his own in those times. But there was a serious side also to Bongani. His activist background gave him unique insights into the needs of communities and the challenges that needed to be overcome to indeed create a better life for all. For him, the phrase, "a better life for all," was not a mere slogan. It was a call to action. It was an injunction to try harder, to work smarter, and to encourage all those around him in the service of others. Bongani displayed a keen intellect and a very sharp mind. Over and above his leadership qualities, he was an outstandingly able administrator. And this is rare these days. It is rare to find a combination of these qualities, the qualities of activist, of a leader, of an administrator, of the man of the people, just in one person. But with all of these attributes, he was always humble. He had a special way of putting forward his ideas that did not threaten or break down others. No matter who you were, you felt comfortable and relaxed in his presence. And those that served at that time would remember that it was quite a tumultuous time. Those of us who worked with Bongani do count ourselves fortunate and are privileged to have called him a colleague and a friend. At this very difficult time, friends and colleagues, our thoughts are with his family. They are with his children. They are with Tammy, his dear wife. They are with the rest of the Gxilishe, the Mdodana, and the Jolobe families. You can take solace from the fact that Bongani leaves behind him a legacy of an activist, as a servant leader of exceptional integrity, as an administrator par excellence, as a friend and colleague to many. Today, there is a Bongani-sized hole that is left in the world. As I move to conclude, Pam, I am reminded of the choral work composed by Ben Chamzashe, Themba Lomthi, as a salute to Tio Soka. In its lyrics, Themba Lomthi says, and I quote, "Themba Lomthi okade be bemqongqotha, Themba Lomthi ovele emahlathini, ungumthi mni na luphezu kwengqangqasi, liceba lomthi wasemahlathini, wagawulwa yini na liceba likaThixo. Phakama mfana, ceba lomthomkhulu. Asinguwona umnquma, asinguwona umkhoba. Asinguwona lomthi wasemahlathini. Ngowela manzi, manzi akawelwa, wuntshu ke wena mfana. Uze uyikhonze iAfrika emnyama. Siyabulela, sithi wuntshu kwiceba lomnquma. We give thanks and we say glory be to the particle of the wild olive tree. Indeed, with the passing of our friend Bongani, a great tree has fallen. Lala ngoxolo Mthembu. Enkosi.
Enkosi kakhulu. Indeed, Themba was one of umthomkhulu. Siyabulela ngalomazwi. Xa sidlula ke sizawubuyela pha ku-Ambassador Basu, who's back in the room. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ma'am. And apologies. Just so happened that I had a power outage about 5 minutes into the program. Thank you very much for this opportunity to say a few words in reflection on the life of Themba, Bongani Gxilishe, this gallant warrior of our revolution. Allow me, before anything, to pay my respects to the family. Nkosikazi kaMthembu nabantwana, family zonke, disithi nxe nilale ngenxeba akuhlanga lungehliyo. Comrades, I think a lot has been said. We can all agree that Bongani's life painted a beautiful, rich, colorful, and bold tapestry that weaves together different epochs, terrains, generations of our national democratic revolution for peace and freedom in our country, and overall, right to self-determination. And as it has already been said, each and every one of us gathered here today was touched by his finest attributes, and therefore could easily say a few words, adding a color or a thread to this rich life. Upon reflection and following the media platforms that have been reflecting on the life of Comrade Themba ever since Ewile, I thought it was perhaps prudent for me and for us to just bring in two specific aspects of Themba's life, which perhaps might not be known widely by all of us in this webinar. First, it is his time at St. John's College, and how I believe and we believe that Themba's life and character was molded from the early days of his schooling at St. John's College. And I think all of us, as young activists and revolutionaries, were actually molded from those early days of high schooling, and so was Themba. And I will touch again, secondly, on his life as a student leader, and specifically his engagement with what I would call the theater of struggle in the Transkei. And again, Themba distinguished himself as part and parcel of that rearguard formation that supported and influenced those struggles. And just lastly, comrades, as I think as Lindiwe have already said, I will also just personally on Themba's kindness, just as a human being, full of humility and full of love. With regard to St. John's, and again, a lot has been said here about Themba being part of the club, student club, football club, St. John's, and a kitman. He was responsible for organizing a kit and making sure he get it right for his squad set. He would later rebut this as not just the role of a kitman, but as a team manager. But I think from there, what I wanted to bring to this conversation is the uniqueness of the struggles that we waged, albeit very small at St. John's College at the time. And St. John's itself being a beacon of education, not only by South Africans, I mean, rather by Transkaians, by all over, students all over the country. St. John's was situated in Namtata, was where our political awareness was formed. And it was in the aftermath, as you would know, of 1976, when Themba went to St. John's College in 1981. It was in the context of student boycotts around 1980s. And a lot of students at the time from St. John's left the country to join the ranks of Mkhonto Wesizwe. We had, of course, as you would know, those who were there, Umkhagi, Mr. French, who was a former Sela Scout. And we will reflect on these developments. And I'm sure, even though Themba was a class ahead of me, he was part and parcel of the conversations that were taking place at the time. And I believe that he was, to some extent, influenced by those early days. Even as he played the role of a kitman, one would think that Themba wanted, to contribute to the collective endeavor of students at that point in time in the sporting field. Taking the role of a kitman, which all of us would laugh at the time, Themba was wanting to contribute, or wanted rather to contribute to that endeavor. No task was small enough for him. Even at that point, that characteristic was imbued in Themba, and he would later demonstrate this characteristic of wanting to be part of the collective and wanting to play a role, however small. And of course, because Nyamazi, at that time in St. John's, we were those who thought that as such, who were not streetwise. And I think Themba, as you would know, later in his life, he demonstrated, awareness of the ways of the streets. And I'm told that even later on, when he went to study at Fort 10, he would come back and seek refuge at St. John's whenever things were heating up in the border region where he was. Colleagues, I then met Themba when I went to a University of Natal, UNDA, when I joined the ASASO myself. He would come over there participating in the student leadership meetings of ASASO, together with Comrades Abomcebisi Jonas, who were with Abu Billy Rabachupa, Mzokisi Banzana, and all of these comrades, Umgoduso, and all of them. And Themba was part and parcel of the leadership of the student movement already at that time. But specifically in the student movement is when I went to University of Transkei later on, around 1998, where I again was together reconnected with Themba. At the time, as you would know, colleagues who were in the Transkei were faced with particular and peculiar challenges of a Bandustan which was intent on crushing any form of resistance, if you call it, and instead of activism, as you will call it. UNITRA had emerged as a beacon and a hotspot of activism at the time. This you will trace at the time when Abo Batando Ndondo and some of his colleagues participated, and the Batanda was finally maimed and killed by Imatanzima regime. UNITRA had to adopt, or students at the time in the Transkei region, had to adopt particular ways of engagement, which were not always the case. For an example, as I was coming from Natal, participation in ASASO was open, participation in the student SRC was open. At that time, we call it BLS. But it was not the case in Transkei. And Comrades had to adopt and innovate in order to advance the cause of the revolution. And Mr. Gxilishe, Comrade Gxilishe, together with other comrades, as I said, they were a rearguard, formation that really supported and influenced those struggles. They would come to our engagement. They would engage us as students in the Transkei, be part of our strategies, be part of our discussions, be part of our engagement. Themba, in more than many occasions, he would crisscross the breadth and all the regions, all the campuses of higher learning in the Transkei, supporting us in forming the branches of Yazaso, then Sanscom. And Themba was there together with Abu Pape and KK, together with Abu Lincoln Mali, and many other comrades. And I think he understood the importance of the mass mobilization and the importance of the role that were to be played by these campuses in our broader revolution. And he gave himself time to ensure that he was with the students, and he was with the comrades on the ground, and he was attending to the constitutional issues. And obviously at that time, he was already the deputy president of SANSCO, and he was playing that role in that capacity. And of course, they will come in the sporting events. They would come in cultural events, and they will be there as well. And it's funny that Lindy raised the issue of gender, because as you know, at the time we're operating almost semi-clandestine in the Transkei. We were not above board. And so we would congregate in the small rooms in the men's hostel as only boys or men. This is core, we are the core of the struggles there. And Themba will really tease us that it was time for us to organize women to join Umzabalaz. And we took heed of that call, and we began to engage with Amakosigas, who were very many women in the University of Transkei and other colleges who wanted to join the struggle. Somebody has said something about his incisive role in political analysis. And we will agree with this, because there was a time at UNITRA when there was a problem of this and set, which had emerged as part of the opening up of the space, political space in Transkei. And he came over to assist us deal with this problem. And he forced us, almost led us to take leadership and to understand the problem better, so that we could come with better solutions to it. And again, Themba was there in his ways. Comrades, without taking much time, I really want to dip our collective banner in memory of Themba. He was a man of integrity. He was a man of purpose. He played a very important role in our struggle. His humility, his lack of any shred of arrogance, lack of any shred of cult of personality, lack of any shred of being a populist. Themba was humble, and Themba understood his role in our revolution, and he played that role. As I said, he didn't suffer fools, and he was very, very committed to our struggle, and he didn't take any position as if it was a position to push his personal grandeur. He took every position importantly as being a deployment by our collective revolution. He was a man of principle. And lastly, at a personal level, I would join those colleagues who says this was a comrade who didn't take interest in you only so far as your participation in the struggle. Themba took interest in you as a human being. He would be there, and I've heard this trait as some of the comrades were reflecting on the WhatsApp group that has been established, that Themba will be there kwizinto zakowenu, kwizinto zasekhaya. Ade albe bafundini awundibizanga ngicela ingoma bantu vele bangicela ingoma nitya nodwa andindibizanga. And he would take interest in that sort of way. And I think we all must aspire to live up to his legacy and beyond. And I thank you very much, Comrade Chair.
Thank you very much. There's a lot of words that's being used to describe Comrade Bongani, and I think all of us agree with them. And the one that I don't quite agree with, and I don't think that's what he said, and that is Bongani and being a sportsman in the same sentence. Okay, but I think you explained it to say that he was a kit man. and he was playing a political role. And I'm glad that your lights are sorted out, because I thought you were still in the semi-clandestine days that you spoke about. We are free people now, and it's okay to have our lights on as we have this session. There are just two things to deal with as we get Professor Mcebisi Mdletana to speak next. One is that just a correction that some of the speakers might have got wrong. He was sorry. Just the families. It's the Ndodana family, which is the family Yaglotami and the Gxilishe family. Umfumbesi, the Jolobe family, if that could be just corrected by the speakers. Also, as agreed, once my camera is on, it means it's time to wrap up. And so let's keep that going. And a cyclist and a sportsman are not two different things. We're talking about competitive sport here. And if that is the case, I'm a runner too, you know. As if Bongani was a cyclist, then I'm a runner. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Professor Mdletana to speak.
All right, thank you, Pam. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts arising from the experience and several encounters I had with Themba. I must say my personal encounter with him was relatively brief, but immensely impactful. When I started doing my recent book, having done all the background research, identified all manner of people I needed to interview, his name came up quite prominently. And some of the folks that I had interviewed, especially Sonwabile Mangcojo, was quite emphatic that Themba is one of the key people I should speak to, and he promptly went ahead to get me in contact with the man. And Bongs quickly agreed that we should meet, which was quite pleasant, right? That he would agree to meet immediately, more or less. So I was excited, but I restrained myself from celebrating the prospect of having that interview, because in my experience prior and during the course of doing that book, I had heard promises and met people, only for those people not to recollect even the elementary of events, the basic things. And some of them would try to convince me that I should be focusing on something else instead of what I was doing, focusing on PE. And others would be utterly and unashamedly defensive about what had happened in Port Elizabeth. And so I restrained my celebratory mood up until I met him. And when I did meet him, I found him to be one of the rare individuals I had encountered, especially people who were involved in reestablishing the ANC, central as he was. He gave me his time. He was open, accommodating, and not only agreeing to meetings, but sitting. Our interviews would take up to 2 hours and even more. And we continued to meet. We met repeatedly. I would drive to see him in East London. Not only did he sit there to talk to me, but his conversations, his input was meaningful. He did not just recollect the marginal, unimportant details, but the key things about what had happened in PE, the reestablishment of the ANC, the challenges that the ANC went on to encounter. So his memory was just impeccable. I mean, he could recall all manner of events, issues, and he mentioned almost everything, from the pleasant to the unpleasant, including events that related to Comrades. He wasn't defensive or denialist about what had happened. And he was narrating all these things. He had this self-deprecating humor about him. You know, his big laugh. He would burst out laughing, telling me all these things. There was an unusually high level of honesty and openness about what he was telling me. Because, you know, prior to meeting him, the reaction, the dominant sentiment about the ANC losing power in PE, for instance, was that people were sad and not willing to engage and confront what had happened. They were still in shock because ilanga lichone, something that they thought would never happen had happened. So most of them did not want to speak about it. It was a mystery because they never thought it possible. But Bongani spoke about it with such ease. And he did that. He engaged in that free manner, probing manner, open manner, because he was self-reflective. You know, he had this reflective awareness about it, because I think he understood, right, that the point of denying this idea of denying the existence of problems was not helpful. Because what had happened, yes, it had something to do with those who were in charge, but history unfolds independently of your feelings. He was involved in the rebuilding of the ANC. They tried all manner of things in the early 90s within the context, based on what they knew. So how things evolved was a product of their time. And they did the best they could based on the information that they had. And so therefore what subsequently happened is not something that they should be ashamed of, but it is something that they should probe, look at, to determine what went wrong, right? So you know, people make history in circumstances not of their own choosing. I think that's what he really understood. And the fact that he could recall these things was also an indication of how aware he was of the moment he was involved in the early 90s. I mean, he could recall events that most people could not. And for someone to have that depth of memory, it is because you thought of what you were doing, because thinking is a process of registering in the mind. So he was not simply just a participant, an actor, unobhala, but he was aware that the actions that they were involved in was actually making history, that they needed to do certain things, connect them together in order to arrive at a certain result. And so that thoughtfulness, that reflection, ensured that he remembered everything that had happened and was able to connect and identify where things had gone wrong, right? And so because he was this reflective human being and appreciated that, you know, a social phenomena is a product of social dynamics, and most of these things we have no control over. So he was open to inquiry, to saying, look, this is what has happened. We made bad decisions because at the time we thought these decisions were good because that's what we know, but time has proven us wrong. And so there is nothing to be ashamed about. Of course, there might be one or two that are embarrassing episodes that are man-made, but others are decisions whose consequences were unintended. And so the idea then is to go back look at these problems and find solutions to them. It is for this reason, everything else that I have just said, that I implore most of us to mourn Bongani in a self-reflective manner. What is it from his life that we can learn and employ in order to deal with our current challenges? This country has a lot of problems. Most of these problems, those who are in authority, instead of identifying them for what they are, dealing with them for what they are, they instead choose to mischaracterize them. Instead of calling a problem an insurrection, they call it a counter-revolutionary or revolution of sorts. In mischaracterizing these problems, they are hoping for a contemporary, or rather a brief relief out of this illusion that this problem is non-existent. So what Bongani's life tells us is that at some point, confronted with a set of problems, we devised some solutions. And at the time, because of where we were, we thought those solutions were suitable. However, time changes, and with the change of time, it later emerged that what we thought was appropriate was only appropriate temporarily for that particular time, but the evolution of time had rendered everything else outdated. So we need to constantly be reflective. Are these things that we thought were best, are they still relevant? And so for me, I experienced Bongani as a reflective, self-reflective human being who was constantly aware of what he was involved in and his environment, but not only that, sought to make change and engaged with people, however critical some of them were. And I hope that is a character that would multiply amongst those who are in power, because they cannot dip their heads in the sand and hope that solutions will come from dreams, but they come from constantly confronting the unpleasant. Thank you very much, Pam.
Thank you very much. As you were talking and characterizing Themba and the situation that we find ourselves in, I'm reminded by Amilcar Cabral's quote that says, "Hide nothing from the masses of our people. Tell no lies, expose lies whenever they are told, mask no difficulties, mistakes, failures, and claim no easy victories." Thank you very much for reminding us of that, because it's in these times that we need to be reflective and be honest to ourselves. And my next speaker is Themba Nomfanele. Over to you, ma'am.
Enkosi Gxilishe hlali ngaphambili. Bubodwa ubuqaqawuli benyanga, bubodwa ubuqaqawuli belanga, bubodwa ubuqaqawuli benkwenkwezi, kuba inkwenkwezi yohluka kwenye inkwenkwezi ngobuqaqawuli. The sun has 1 degree of splendor, the moon and the stars another, and star differs from star in splendor. And this comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 41. Bongani kaloku ebeseludodana, ndithi maniqale apho. Ngalentlwa ndithi tutwini, ndithi ngxe kusapho ikhaya nezihlobo, Madiba, Sopitso, Ngqolomsilo vele bambhentsele, nakoZotsho ndithi lalani ngenxeba kuhlanga lungehliyo. In joining my colleagues, especially Dr. Ndletyana, who just left the podium, perhaps in looking at the life of Bongani, his legacy demands that we grapple with what it means to be fully human, paying attention to the complexities, the peculiarities, and particularities with its own persistent themes and theorizations. And our gathering here tonight, I believe, reflect not only his singular qualitative attributes, but cascades and intersects with the full canvas and spectrum of what humanity entails and all its flaws born out of being humane. Bongani bingumuntu wabantu lo. Assembled here today are elements, I believe, according to Professor Pumeza in her latest book, Voices of Liberation by Mamu Miriam Tlali, that assembled here today are elements of Bongani's body contours, its symmetry along the lines of friendship, of comradeship, his sisters and brothers, his aunts and uncles, and his siblings from a younger generation. And I want to count myself as one of those Bongani siblings from a young generation. Bongani, in my view, is what Steve Biko referred to when he spoke of the greatest gift possible, that of a humane face, the revolutionary, full of love that Che Guevara spoke about, the selfless patriot Oliver Tambo eulogized at Maseru and Nlobatse following massacres, as well as iqoti elabonwa ngukaMqhayi kumbongo wakhe ukuzika kukaMendi. Bongani taught us, as the proud Nigerian Ben Okri dared us in his work titled A Way of Being Free, that there is no such thing as a powerless people, that there are only those who have not seen and who have not used their power and will. And Bongani made us believe, as Okri did, that it is possible for the unvalued ones to help create a beautiful new era in human history. And that new vision should come from those who suffer most and who love life most. And in the spirit of that self-reflection, I just want to go back a few days ago. As we marked International Mandela Day on the 18th, it was hard not to think about Bongani and the life he and many in his generation led. You know, Bongani embodied and personified the values of Madiba. Madiba naye. His thoughts, his actions, his intellect and bravery emulated Madiba. I must say that the Bongani I know, whose ancestors have now called home, was a fitting product of his times. He was a product of the Defiance campaign of the 60s, and that ushered his birth, the strength and the resilience of the 70s, as well as the 80s that catapulted him into youth and student activism, as well as the hope and optimism that we felt as we ushered in April 1994. It was into that rich fusion of decades that Bongani emerged as a freedom fighter, a revolutionary and a loving patriot of this great land. It was also during the mid-80s that Bongani's activism shone bright like a diamond under the burning furnaces of the tyranny of the apartheid regime. I myself, I was a teenage klep hoyer, a stone thrower, an activist who recently 87. Amaqabane alapha inkokheli zami uComrade uAmbassador Rapumlekane, uComrade Lulu Johnson, oMkhumotse Mkhodiri, oBizana Ngesi, oDipo Peters, oPhoebe Potgieter, namanye amaqabane engazokwazi ukuwabiza namhlanje. La maqabane ngawo wayebambile ngezonsuku zethu. It was to comrades like uBongani, uShaya Mshengu, Lumkile Gulati, sehlala kunye pha eBos Village eGqeberha. Ubhuti Mkhuseli Jack eXimiya kwistrato kwakuhlala kuso Omre Mhlaba. Ndihlala mina eSandla kwistrato kwakuhlala kuso the Mvusi family, kuhlala the Pityana family, kuhlala the Jolobe family. Ndikhulele kwimeko ezilolo hlobo. It was Bongani then who inducted me to the New Brighton branch of the ANC Youth League as a 14-year-old who had nothing but the courage of her convictions that stirred the burning fire in me. Ndandimncinci kakhulu kodwa ke ekufikeni kwami ndiphuma kwi-courses nakwi-young Christian students sifike uBongani khona. Bongani was a teacher, bengutishala, and I was his student. He taught through his actions. It was Bongani who made the young Christian students see, judge, and act method and gave it its meaning beyond its pedagogical value. It was during those clandestine classes, phakwa eFerguson ke eBlawa, kwakukho igarage yakwaXexe phaa xa ungena usuke eDepart kule ndawo ithandwayo ngokululutsha kakhulu kuthiwa kuse-Black Impala. Xa usuke eBlack Impala ungena eFerguson, kukho laa garage nobuxhakaxhaka. Ebhekhi kwalaa garage kwakukho indawo apho sasiba namagqugula khona. And that's where we were taught politics. Le nto kuthiwa i-dialectical materialism, Das Kapital, i-political economy, nazo zonke ezi zinto ndazifunda ndisemncinci ndizifundiswa nguBongani Gxilishe. It was then up to me, the student who went on zealously to imbibe ii-clauses ze-Freedom Charter at a later stage. UBongani ke siye samazi into yoba naye ebenxanelwe le politiki eyifunda encanca ku-Omgov no-Omre. Bengumuntu wasekuhlaleni uBongani, ebaze bahlali eyazi imizabalazo yabo, bengayithandi ke i-corruption, bengayifuni kakhulu ngoba besazi i-corruption iyonakalisa. Ndithi ke kubantu baseGqeberha xa sawufuna inkokheli masijonge uBongani, sijonge ii-values zikaBongani, ubomi bephila uBongani, kwenzela into basazi ngaba sithetha ngenkokheli, sithetha ngenkokheli enjani. Sekuthethiwe ke apha nge-ethos of citizenship stewardship, andizongena kuzo. uBongani usikhonzile isizwe. Umkake ngexesha elinzima apho isizwe sethu sifuna ubuchule bokucinga, ubuchule bokukhokela nobuchule bokwenza. Sithi ke ingqondo kaBongani izawukhunjulwa, sizamkhumbula naye singoNomava, singooPanki, singooThulephi, singooBrenda, singoNoncebalosi, because he was totally against the erasure of women's voices in our struggle, uBongani. Now, that's why nani nibona le program inje namhlanje ine-gender balance, because uBongani bengazoyifuna into ebingazoba nathi phakathi. He's the one who taught us to think analytically in a dialectical manner, ebe-political lokuxabana. I'll miss his smile, his laughter and his wisdom. Koomadiboye myemonqolo msila ovela bambhantsele, ndithi kubo nxe hlanga ulingehlanga. Kwethami ke mhlobam, I know that umkelwe. Ndiyalikhumbula bali lakho wawundihlekisa ngalo ngoBongani. uBongani nihleli kunye ningxingxile. uBongani ejonga uFacebook, ujonge le ntombazana inxibe i-bathing costume. Uvuke wena, ubuze Bongani, who are you paving at? Ngubani umjongileyo? Athi uBongani, hayi mani ngumfamfa lona Thami tyhini. Unothini undicingela kwinto ezinjalo? So I always laugh at that. Ndithi ke kuwe Mthembu, thina nosisi Mabuyiso Njeca, sithi phumla wethu, uyavuya wena, uzawudibana noMampele, notata lala ngoxolo Madiba sobitsho, silahlekele isizwe, enkosi.
Enkosi Mamthembu. As we're moving to our second last speaker, which is Mkhululi Phakade, I want to just echo the last part of your input about the importance and role of women in the struggle or in the national democratic revolution. I think there's a strong call that women, a nation that does not empower or recognize its women and making sure that they play a leadership role, it is that nation it will be found wanting. So not just in terms of when you say we need people who are able to do, who are able to think, who are just not necessarily looking for glory. We are calling on a woman, young and old, to join in the struggle that comrades like Comrade Mthembu was part of. And I'm just hoping that at some point in the deliberations, we're going to pick up, either they're going to confess who this woman organizer was, because we want to honor that comrade that Comrade Lindiwe was talking about. But if it doesn't happen, I might just reveal him, because the name is on there. It was revealed, Mr. X, in the chat box. But on a serious note, over to you, Khululi.
Thank you, Namcira. Mandibulise kuwe Bishop. Ndibulise family zombini, family yakwaMdodana, family yakwaGxilishe. Ndibulise abantwaneni akaBongani. Ukwekwe, Monwabisi, ndibulise kuzoxola. Ndibulise to my fellow participants in the panel, in the program, and say all protocols observed. I stand here on behalf of a broad range of Bong's friends who have been grieving since the announcement of his passing. Tim was a giant of giants. It is therefore impossible to cover his life through a 2-hour session and still be able to accommodate everyone. We are living in difficult times and dangerous times. For the first time in the history of my relationship with Bongani, it has never happened that we could not see one another as often as we wished. I saw him twice in 2020, firstly at a mutual friend's funeral, Tswai Poswa, in February 2020, and the second time when we met was at Bong's mother's funeral in early December 2020. Our last interaction physically was at the gravesite in PE. That's the time when we were burying his mother. It is unbelievable that now we'll only interact with Bongani's cold body during his funeral in PE on the 23rd of July. This is 7 months after burying his mother. The pain that has gripped me and quite a number of people has certainly left us crying with a lot of questions that we've been asking ourselves. Amongst those being, could Bongs be alive should he have stayed in the Eastern Cape? Why did he leave the Eastern Cape, given so many good things that are being said about him? Maybe one day somebody will tell us why. Did he have to leave his home province where he's said to be loved and respected? I think that goes back to what Prof was saying about this self-reflection that we must do. In 2021, Bongani and I never met. Basically, I've not seen him this year, save for regular calls and WhatsApp chats, complemented by online meetings from time to time. I'm sketching this picture purely because I know that there are many of us who had my experience, with Bongani, especially given the disruption that has been caused by COVID. And of course, his relocation has also been another disruption in his life. Relocation can be a source of disruption in our social lives and family lives. Such could result in stress, which could compromise health systems of individuals. I do not have to shoot anyone other than disrupt his or her own life, and that could cause death. So this disruption could have been a cause of death in Bongani's life. My last WhatsApp conversation with Bongani was on the 3rd of July. We were analyzing the increasing numbers of people who have been affected, by COVID. And when we looked at the numbers, in the manner that they're increasing, his last message to me was around 1:30 on that day, which is the 3rd of July. His last sentence was in the chat that we had. His last sentence was, "This is a trail of destruction." That's basically what Bongani said to me on the 3rd of the 7th. And I responded and said, "Injaro Madiba, the sad part is not knowing when this will end and how much damage would have been done by this." And Madiba never responded again. That is basically our last conversation in our chat. He kept quiet until I received a call on the 6th of July from his dear wife, Mrs. Tami, around 9:30 in the evening, that Madiba had been admitted and was already, on sedation. Literally, there's been no time to comfort Madiba. There's been no time to say goodbye. And I'm sure many of our friends in this platform feel the same. Especially that is basically what has happened to most of us. Dear comrades and friends of Bongani, I'm sure you have your own stories to share about our individual interactions with Madiba during this past week of horror. I say this program director purely because it's a personal experience that I've had, in the last week or so. And I felt that I must start there before I can get into talking about Bongani as a dependable friend. Gxilishe was such a dependable man whose sense of humor made everything he does look effortless and easy to achieve. I'll cover this aspect as I witnessed his interactions with friends, how he showed love to his family, and how he showed love to ordinary people. There's a friend of ours way back in the mid-90s, towards late 90s. We had a friend of ours who stayed in a one-bedroom RDP home. And this was Madiba's comrade and friend. And he wanted to visit him and enjoy this one-bedroom home of a comrade. So he visited and stayed at this house over a couple of days. The house, as you enter, had a bed and a chair in what was supposed to be in a lounge. I'm sure all of us do know how the RDP homes, look like. Madiba had his meetings at this place and would visit him, and as we visited him, we kept on asking questions, but why are you staying in this area, but you're still gonna have your meetings? Madiba replied, he said, Zocho, there is nothing wrong with the venue of my meetings. All my meetings are happening well with great success. The problem is with you as my visitors who are interrupting my stay. My friend here has given me the best in what he has in his property portfolio. We always laughed at this story because it turned out that this friend only had this RTP home, but why would you call it a portfolio of properties? That is the kind of Gxilishe that we know, putting something in a very humorous and very simple way. Gxilishe was such an ordinary man and such a simple man. Another encounter, again, to show the same humility about Bongani. A friend and comrade of his who studied at Rhodes University, who obtained an honors degree in social sciences many years ago, had a drinking challenge which required for him to be rehabilitated. Bongs mobilized his friends from Rhodes then into action, and they managed to raise funds for this friend and comrade for him to be taken to rehabilitation. When the rehabilitation phase at the center was complete, Bongs and Tammy agreed to keep the friend at their home in King Lamstown. Bongani would bring the friend to my house in East London, and he became part and parcel of our social life and socializing. One day he said, Man, masifihlelele chep, our wines which we drink. That was before he started wearing his red attire from the Methodist. So he says, Man, masifihlelele chep, wines ingati lenga ulwini. So effectively suggesting that this proposal meant that we should hide our drinks or stop drinking when the friend is around. We did as Madiba suggested. Over time, the friend improved, and sadly, the support Madiba gave to this friend was disrupted again by him being uprooted out of the Eastern Cape into going to Johannesburg. Again, another disruption in his life. This is how dependable Bongs was. His position and stature in society never got to his head. He never deserted his own people. He really cared and genuinely loved his friends. On the family front, Bongani loved his family and had a well-rounded approach in reaching out to all the components of his clan. He deeply embedded himself and in his roots at Kala on the father's side and in Alice Komovuso on the Mambele side. This is the kind of Bongani that we had. But when Bongani took a backseat in politics, he never, stayed at home and said, "I'll do nothing." He started getting himself involved into community work. As he lived and passed, as he passed in the last week or so, we were busy with the program where Bongani was busy with the Makoma Foundation, in a project that seeks to develop the museum for the Makoma Foundation. I can say more and more program that the list is long. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zocho, and showing that side of Bongani as an activist, because every site is a site of struggle. And sometimes people tend to think that it's in positions and in organizations that they could do this. But as activists, real activists of our movement, we often understand, or we understand that in giving, it is less about receiving, but it's more about giving, and also more importantly, serving. And with those words, I'm going to ask the last speaker, which is Comrade Mcebisi Jonas. Over to you, Mce.
Thank you very much, Comrade Timekeeper. And I hope you won't intimidate me. I'll be very short. Bishop, Sid, and colleagues, comrades, and friends, Family Gxilishe, both the Mdodana and Gxilishe family as a whole. I'm probably going to be very brief and probably focused on a couple of things that I think are worth raising on an occasion like this. But I want to start off by saying that we have lost a very special person. And I'm sure other speakers have demonstrated how special Bongani was. He had an unquestionable integrity, humility, and professionalism, those who worked with him. But he also had a very amazing humor that sometimes, in many instances, will take us out of difficult situations. But more importantly, I think Bongani was rooted in the traditions of the liberation movement in true and proper. It was not just an imposition on that. When I heard about Bongani's passing, and the first thing that you think about was the early days when we encountered this young activist of the student movement. And the first thing that came to mind was those moments when we would go in and out of his Jabavu home. And I thought very interestingly about his mother and sisters. I remember asking many people every time that, because it was a family, it was a house that was always full of people. But what is important about what the family Bongani did in those times, particularly Mamak, was that Bongani as an activist had a cover from the family. It was a cover of love. It was a cover of care. And in many instances, I think when we used to go about in hiding, and we kind of had instances where we had to go and sleep in strange spaces in Zwede and other parts of PE and of the province. And Bongani always had to go back to Mama Wake and get money from Mama Wake to support him in all those times. And I think, if anything, that I'm sure had an enduring impact in his personality that I think everybody had spoken so much about. So in many senses, I think, as we pay tribute to Bongani, we probably are indeed paying tribute to his family for what they've done to mold this character that has become so valuable to the liberation movement in general. I wanted to start off by saying that Bongani was in many ways a product of the student movement. And if those who have gone through the student movement, and again, I mean, it's important that we kind of probably say this, those who have gone through the student movement will appreciate that after the 70s and the early 80s and the mid 80s, if there is anything that almost like defined the student movement in those periods, apart from activism, it was a process of trying to integrate student politics into broader struggles of South Africa. It was a process of trying to shift student support to support for the liberation movement, a process that probably culminated around 1989 when the campaign for talking to the ANC started. And Bongani was central to that process. The second dimension of that process was a serious reflection on what the struggle was about. And I think we spent endless days in those periods, most of those who worked with Bongani, endless days, not just reading books about what the struggle was about, what was the actually existing material conditions in South Africa that were seeking to change. But we spent so much time trying to ensure that we understand it so acutely. We also understood the method of struggle that we have adopted, both from a theoretical level and at a practical level. That had an enduring impact on a cadre like Bongani. But there was also another dimension of student politics. I've gone through many sectors of the struggle. One of the defining features of the student movement was how close the network was. And most of those who participated in the 80s and probably those who would remain until the 90s, one thing that you could find as a defining feature was the fact that there was comradeship proper. It was a proper network. It had a very strong humane basis. People would even go to an extent of finding money to support those who could not afford to study. People would go around trying to find places to put those who did not have a place to study. And people cared for each other at a very basic human level. And that feature again, and those who worked with Bongani beyond at a formal level after that, will actually also attest to the fact that that had an enduring impact on the character that we know as Bongani. So everybody has said Nabutu as the nickname that he got over time. And it was interesting to think about the nickname, how the nickname arose. Bongani was a great mobilizer as a young student activist. He was the great mobilizer. He was a good orator, and Bongani would actually chant slogans at an end. And one of the slogans he once surprised us with in the middle of a meeting, he says, "Viva Nabutu Mati." So when we asked him, who's that Bongani? And he kind of waffled a little bit, and it took him a couple of days to come back and tell us that, no, it's an El Salvadorian revolutionary, and as it were. But that name stuck with him. That was Bongani at an early stage. And all of those features found themselves in the next stages of his life. I would jump and say that in the early stages of post-94, Bongani played another seminal role, a seminal role in what probably is less documented, the transition of the liberation movement into formal politics. Bongani played, he was the first secretary of the provincial executive of the Eastern Cape. He was faced with the task of amalgamating the different regions of the Eastern Cape. But more importantly, I think, it was also a task of redefining the culture of the movement in the context of formal politics. There were interesting elements to this, and I'll come back to them later. One of them was also to look at how the shape of the provincial government, how to integrate the different administrations, and how to build the new administration. And if that task was being handled at the political level by somebody who's pompous, who doesn't understand the basic theoretical frameworks that they guide our struggle, who also didn't understand the importance of building an accountable professional public service, we probably could have landed in a different direction. Again, I want to say that he played such a seminal role in the rebuilding of the public administration in the Eastern Cape, but also actually transitioning the ANC into formal politics. Now, sometimes we talk about cult of personality in different ways, but I think heroes like Bongani get submerged because of cult of personality in our politics. We only think about Mandela and a couple of other big names, and we don't realize that on the ground, the very foundation of the post-apartheid South Africa was shaped by leaders like Bongani. It was shaped by soldiers and activists like Bongani. And that's probably something that I think we should think about. How do we lift these heroes and begin to expose them? After he left the political office as secretary of the ANC, Bongani joined the public administration. And I want to pause here because I think there's an important thing that we seldom talk about. There were three pathways into public administration that you had in those periods. The first was you either came from the old Bantustan CPA administrations, and as part of the sunset clause, you then get accommodated into public service. The second was those who were deployees of the liberation movement. And in that sense, you kind of walk in and get placed in this thing. Of course, there was a third thing at the time, which was very weak. People who were just innocent professionals who were just coming out of school who joined at different levels of this thing. Now, it's very important to actually realize that, and I remember that in that period, we did a study, and Bongani was actually behind all of that work, and we engaged on all of that work, looking at the public administration in the Eastern Cape, looking at social development and education, and when there were serious problems there. And the outcome was that part of the problem was that in both departments, there was a dominant Bantustan bureaucratic influence that actually drove what was happening in those departments. We debated and said maybe we should increase the number of activists in this department so that we can solve them. But the other problem is that even the concept of activist had changed. Even the concept of a comrade has changed, because many of those bureaucrats actually realized very early that in order to sustain themselves in this position, they have to quickly join SATU, they joined NEHAU as leaders quickly. Some joined the ANC as branch chairpersons, etc., etc. And sometimes I always ask myself, some of the problems we have, the difficulty in understanding what is currently confronting us, is it not because of those bases that we have those things, as it were? I worked with Bongani in the department in one of the departments in the Eastern Cape. One thing I can say, that the fact that he had political clout, he came from the political organization, never steered him away from sharpening his professional credentials. I want to end by saying that as we bid farewell to Bongani, we're doing so in a different context. The ANC is at a crossroads. Our country is almost close to kleptocracy. Our country is close to being a failed state. As cadres of the movement and those who have traveled the road with Bongani, I would say that if there's any tribute we should give him, it should be to work towards protecting our democracy, steering back the wagon onto the very foundations of the struggle in South Africa. And I end by saying to the family, Tammy, I know that we cannot say any words that probably could replace the pain that you have. But I think as the movement, I'm saying as all friends of Bongani, we can only say, Kola, this is God's work, and we've got to accept it as it is.
Thank you very much, Comrade Mcebisi. And it is, we are just almost short of time, and we apologize. We might just go over about like 2 minutes or so, and apologies for that. I just want to thank, there will be a speaker who's going to be doing a vote of thanks. And and I just want to say from my side, I want to thank all the panelists for having to put up with the timekeeper. and also as someone who grew up at a particular stage and came from the student movement, and same as Comrade Bongani. And I feel this is a befitting moment, and the way we've honored Themba, and I think we did it in a way that I think we learned from other leaders in the student movement. And there's a lot of comrades, and I wouldn't want to make the mistake of mentioning them, but there are some comrades that I think in this moment they're worth mentioning. About Comrade Bongani More, about Comrade Phoebe, or Comrade Tululu Johnson, who also played a role in the student movement. So I just want to say to those comrades, yeah, your work didn't go in vain. And I'm going to hand over now to Dr. Fundile Nyati, who's going to do two things: a vote of thanks to everyone for coming today, and also make certain announcements. But on my side, thank you very much for the opportunity. And I get sorry that we were like 2 minutes late. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I was asked to do this last part of the program, which is basically just to do a vote of thanks and also make some announcements. But before I do so, I just want to introduce myself. Fundile Nyati. I've known Bongani for the last 40 years. We met when we were students together at St. John's College at the age of 16 for him and 14 for me. That's, a period where he was still a very young man. And a few months into that, he lost his dad through some, circumstances that were quite traumatic. We bonded as friends. We were compartment mates in the same dormitory at St. John's Dorm 33 at Etheridge House. We went through all the bullying together. And all I need to say, though, about him, was a very interesting chap, humor, plus. But he was very poor, not gifted as a sportsman, which is why he then decided that the best thing that he could do was to use his voice. He could sing amagwijo, kakulu, and he appointed himself what we call umdwezi. When our soccer team was playing, he would be the guy. When we score, he will go to the center and sleep there on the floor, just to, make sure that we celebrate that goal. So, but anyway, to move into thanking Abantu, Ubongani, his family, the Gxilishe family and the Mtwadana family, I think we must thank them for giving us the opportunity to, celebrate Ubongani. They are very busy preparing for the funeral, but they still managed to get time, to attend this webinar. I must also thank Bishop Sidwell Mukhotu because, it's important, but ubize uThixo abe khona so that it is blessed. And indeed, there were a number of hackers who were here trying to hack this thing, but we managed to continue without any hacking. There's also, to thank politicians from different parts of the country, including the home province of the Eastern Cape. I saw Changisa Apa, Gift Ngondi, and other people. So yeah, thank you for their coming into this webinar. The fellow panelists, Zonka and Zubiza, anyone by name, but they've done a great job. Thank you for that. And all of the participants, we had 590 people, in this call. And all of them, they played a very positive role. There's a lot of messages that we need to harvest and pass on to the family. but also fellow public servants. You know, Ubongani sekuchiwo ukuba he chose a public administration route, and in that direction, he never wanted to abuse the fact that he was actually quite senior as a politician. But anyway, fellow public servants, thank you very much for being here. You know, so in terms of announcements, there's just 3 announcements that are important to make. The first one is the fact that because Bongani was the HOD of COPTA Upper Gauteng government, there is a memorial service that is starting at 9 a.m. tomorrow until 11 in the morning. And that is going to be hosted by the MEC, Ulebo Maile. And in that webinar, in that memorial service, the Premier of Gauteng, David Makura, will actually be the main speaker. And that just shows how much this province of Gauteng appreciated what Bongani brought in his short period of working within this province, because Ufike early last year and it's just been over a year, yet he has made such a great impact, you know, as an administrator and also as somebody who is sound in politics. So that is 9 to 11 tomorrow morning. And then at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, the ANC province in the Eastern Cape and the region of Nelson Mandela Bay, they will have a memorial service, a virtual memorial service for Ubongani. And so that's the second event that will be in his honor. And the last thing is that he will be buried on Friday, this coming Friday, the 23rd of July. You know, and the funeral will be in PE. Umzimba wakhe uhambile izolo wafika kakuhle eGqeberha. And so his funeral is going to be live on the Mpuma Kapa TV, which is channel 260 on DSTV. And it's important that people, you know, who want to follow this funeral, they check the TV or Mpuma Kapa TV Facebook page or YouTube page. You know, because of the issue here, COVID, it is important that we know that we cannot go beyond the maximum number of 50, and both families are quite big families, including other people, you know, that Bongani has touched. So it's gonna be a problem if, you know, people want to be part of that funeral because the numbers are just too small. So please watch it on TV, watch it on Facebook, or watch it on YouTube. Those are the only announcements that I was asked to make. And with that, thank you very much, moderator. I didn't thank you, but uyiphathe kakuhle kakhulu, sanqwabalala nesandla kamnandi. So apologies for going over by a few minutes, but this is an event that I think befitted the quality of person that Bongani was. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think my job is done, and thanks to everyone for attending, and good night.
Thank you.
Just one small thing is that the service, the Gauteng government service, is that it starts at 11.
Oh, okay.
Tomorrow morning. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
And the funeral?
The funeral starts at 9 o'clock, so it will be live from 9 o'clock in the morning on Friday, the 23rd of July.
Do we have a link for Gauteng? A link?
No, there isn't a link that has been advertised here. So, but if there is, then we will make sure that it is shared before that time.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Per. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nyati.
Thank you,
everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bishop.
Bye. Thank you, Penny. We never had we never formally had the name of the gender activist.
Exactly.
we were robbed.
I just want to write something here. Meeting ID 98. Okay, there's a, I think there's a meeting ID for tomorrow's thing. Okay, we will.
I saw it somewhere.
Yes,
I also saw a poster somewhere.
Moderator, what was the maximum number here? Did you have 500? Did you have?
We had 590 people on the call.
Okay, and then on YouTube,
we'll have to check that. We'll have to check that, and others were on Facebook as well.
Oh, okay.
And then others were on the EC Today, so maybe they can tell us, you know, the YouTube and the Facebook EC Today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a quick one.
Well done, Tim.
Okay, thank you for this. Thank you. Singathwe ngoba uthethe noThixo phezulu, hackers were circling around trying to sabotage.
Oh.
Yeah, but isathi sendiziqhelile ndiyazazi kubakho i-link and you know, so they settled in the first 30 minutes, but yeah. Okay, password is copter.
Just send a WhatsApp, Bele.
Yes, okay, let me try and look for this.
WhatsApp. Yeah, I will also check with this Pumeza. She was checking on them on the
9806529848, and then call. Okay, now I'll send a WhatsApp. All right.
Sure.
Okay,
good.
sure.
Great.
Okay, so the ID.
Thanks, Bele. Do you know what time are we connecting again?
Today.
Yeah, I'd asked to Richard that if we could meet today, it could have been better, you know?
All right, so let me. Okay, thank you. Well done. Uyiphethe kakuhle nto kakhulu, wayinika isidima.
Okay, siyabulela.
Bele. Wenzela nibe simthumela wathi agqobagqotha kwa-organizer lo westaging.
Jonah, if it was any consolation, I also had a poem to read at the end. I couldn't, you know.
I had a farewell thing to say after, but I posted it anyway.
Oh, okay. Siyabonga, bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Sure.
Bye. Yole. Kurunyukiwa. Azafoni choni zamshini.
98065298458.